El vaquero que besó la herida para salvarla, y terminó perdiendo el corazón. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and warm earth, and the distant mountains stood like silent guardians over the vast land. Here, in the solitude of the desert, Santiago lived a life that was quiet, simple, and predictable. He was a young cowboy, tall and lean, with calloused hands and a face weathered by the sun. His days were long and filled with work, tending cattle, mending fences, and riding across the trails that stretched as far as the eye could see. He had learned early that life in these plains demanded strength, patience, and the ability to endure loneliness. Santiago had always felt comfortable with his own company. He enjoyed the rhythm of the plains, the gentle lowing of cattle, the soft rustle of wind through the dry grass, and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. These sounds were like music to him, familiar and comforting. He had never married, never held close anyone who could challenge his independence, and he liked it that way. For Santiago, emotions were dangerous. They distracted a man from survival and responsibility. Love, friendship, or attachment could make life complicated, and he had learned to keep his heart guarded, like a wild stallion refusing to be tamed. One morning, Santiago awoke earlier than usual. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the cool morning breeze carried a promise of warmth to come. He saddled his horse, a strong chestnut mare named Luna, and set out to check on the northern part of his grazing land. The plains were vast, stretching endlessly under the morning light, and Santiago moved with ease, knowing each path, each hollow, and each stream as if they were part of him. He whistled softly, a tune his father had taught him, and Luna responded with gentle snorts, trotting steadily across the terrain. As he approached a narrow canyon near the river, something unusual caught his eye. There, among the rocks and sparse vegetation, lay a figure. At first, Santiago thought it might be a traveler resting, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman. She was sprawled on the ground, her body twisted in an awkward angle, one leg bent unnaturally beneath her. Her horse was nearby, grazing calmly as if nothing had happened. Santiago's heart skipped a beat not from fear, but from an instinctive concern he could not ignore. He dismounted quickly, his boots kicking up dust, and ran to her side. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with worry. The woman stirred, wincing as she tried to move. Her dark hair fell over her face, and when she lifted it, Santiago saw her eyes deep, dark, and filled with pain. She looked up at him, uncertain, fragile, and yet there was a quiet strength in her gaze that made him pause. She tried to speak, but a groan escaped her lips instead. Santiago carefully examined her ankle, which was swollen and bruised. "You've twisted it badly," he said gently. "I can help." Santiago had never cared for anyone like this before. He had helped injured animals countless times, but helping a human being, especially a woman, was different. There was a vulnerability in her posture, a quiet plea for help that spoke to something deep within him. He carefully lifted her, supporting her weight as he guided her toward a shaded area near the riverbank. He pulled water from his canteen and gently cleaned the dirt and small cuts on her hands and arms. Then he noticed a deeper wound on her leg, a small gash that was bleeding more than it should. Without thinking, Santiago pressed a cloth to the cut, and instinctively, almost without realizing it, he leaned closer and pressed his lips to the wound. The gesture was not romantic, not calculated. It was a pure act of instinct, a desperate effort to stop the bleeding, to ease her pain. The woman flinched at first, then relaxed slightly as if she understood he meant no harm. She introduced herself as Isabella, her voice soft but firm, like a breeze that carried strength despite its gentleness. She told Santiago that she had been riding alone, exploring the region, when her horse stumbled on a hidden rock, throwing her off and leaving her injured. Santiago listened quietly, never interrupting, his eyes studying her face, her movements, the way she spoke. There was something about her courage, her honesty, her quiet dignity, that made him feel both protective and strangely alive in a way he had never experienced before. Santiago knew he could not leave her there. The river was far from the village, and the sun would rise high soon, turning the plains into an unforgiving furnace. With careful hands, he lifted her onto Luna, making sure she was secure. He climbed beside her and guided the horse along the narrow paths, the reins held firmly, yet his attention never left her. She winced occasionally, and Santiago would pause, murmuring soft reassurances. Every mile they traveled seemed to draw them closer, not just physically, but in a way that words could not explain. As they approached the small village where Santiago often stayed, he noticed the life that bustled within it. Children ran along dirt roads, women carried baskets filled with vegetables, and men tended to their work in the fields. The village seemed peaceful, yet Santiago's focus was solely on Isabella. He guided Luna to a shaded spot near the village square, gently helping Isabella dismount. He offered her water and a place to rest, and she accepted, her eyes showing a mixture of relief and gratitude. Over the next few days, Santiago remained close to Isabella, helping her heal. He brought her food, cleaned her wound, and ensured she was comfortable. They spoke often, sharing stories of their pasts, of the loneliness they had endured, and of dreams that seemed too far away. Santiago learned about Isabella's family, her life in the distant city, and the adventures that had led her to these plains. In return, he told her about the vast land he called home, the trials of a life lived in solitude, and the lessons he had learned about strength and survival. Something within Santiago began to shift. The quiet bond they formed, the shared laughter, the mutual care, and the simple act of being present started to awaken feelings he had long buried. He realized that he was no longer indifferent to the presence of another person. Isabella's smile, her voice, the subtle way she watched the horizon, all of it left an imprint on his heart. For the first time, he questioned his own solitude and wondered if perhaps life could be richer when shared with someone else. By the end of the week, Isabella could walk with less difficulty, and Santiago had grown accustomed to her presence. The villagers whispered about the young cowboy and the mysterious woman, but Santiago paid little attention. His focus remained on her well-being, her comfort, and the quiet moments they shared in the fading light of the plains. He found himself anticipating each day not for the work it demanded, but for the chance to see her, to speak with her, and to share the simple beauty of life that unfolded in these remote lands. The sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery reds and oranges, and Santiago and Isabella sat together on a small hill, watching the shadows stretch across the plains. There was silence between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding, with the recognition of two lives intersecting in a moment that felt both fleeting and eternal. Santiago realized that he had found something unexpected, something that went beyond duty or instinct. It was connection, trust, and the gentle stirring of emotions he had long denied himself. As night fell, Santiago knew that life would continue as it always had. The plains would remain vast, the cattle would need tending, and the wind would still whisper across the land. But something had changed within him. For the first time, he understood that life was not only about surviving, but about feeling, caring, and opening one's heart, even when it was risky. And though he could not yet name it, he knew that this encounter, the moment he had pressed his lips to Isabella's wound, had awakened something deep inside, something that would shape the days, months, and perhaps even years to come. Santiago returned to his small cabin that night, the stars twinkling above like distant fires. He thought of Isabella lying safely in the village, of her laughter, her stories, and the quiet strength she carried. And in the solitude of his room, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, realizing that sometimes The world had a way of placing people in one another's lives at exactly the right time. And perhaps, just perhaps, this encounter was only the beginning of a journey neither of them could have foreseen. After the first days of care, Isabella's ankle began to improve slowly, but Santiago knew she was still weak and needed support. Every morning he arrived at the small village at dawn, bringing fresh bread, fruits, and water from the river. He helped her rise, gently guiding her steps, making sure she did not fall again. Their routine became natural, almost comforting. Santiago, who had once valued solitude above all, now found himself looking forward to these moments, the quiet hours where they shared stories, laughed softly, and watched the world awaken around them. Isabella, despite her injury, had a strength that surprised Santiago. She did not complain often, though the pain was evident in the careful way she moved. She asked questions about the land, the cattle, and the life of a cowboy. Her curiosity was sincere, and Santiago, who had always been reserved, found himself opening up to her. He told her about his childhood, growing up in the harsh plains with only the company of animals and the wind. He spoke of the lessons his father had taught him about resilience, responsibility, and the importance of staying true to one's word. Isabella listened intently, asking questions, and sometimes gently challenging his views with a spark of humor. Santiago realized he had never met anyone who could balance strength and curiosity like her. The bond between them grew quietly, almost imperceptibly. Each day brought small gestures that connected them further. Santiago would fetch water for Isabella, help her sit comfortably, and sometimes offer his jacket to keep her warm as the nights grew chilly. Isabella, in turn, shared stories of her life in the city, tales of festivals, family gatherings, and childhood memories that painted a world far different from the plains. Santiago listened eagerly, fascinated by her experiences. He realized that while the land he loved was vast and beautiful, it had been incomplete until this shared presence added color to it. One afternoon, as the sun burned high in the sky, Isabella insisted on trying to walk along the riverbank. Santiago stayed close, supporting her with a firm but gentle grip. The earth beneath them was uneven, and each step required careful attention. Isabella laughed nervously as she stumbled, and Santiago chuckled softly, feeling a warmth in his chest he could not explain. "You have to trust yourself," he said. "I'll be right here if you need me." She nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips, and took a deep breath. Step by step, she moved forward, and Santiago felt a quiet pride in her determination. As the days passed, Santiago found himself observing Isabella in new ways. The way she tilted her head when she spoke, the soft expression in her eyes when she laughed, and the subtle gestures she made without realizing, they all etched themselves into his mind. He had never imagined that a connection could form so naturally, so strongly, with someone who was, just days ago, a stranger. The simple acts of caring for her wound had blossomed into a deeper attachment, one that Santiago tried hard to understand. He wondered whether this was merely compassion or something more profound, something that could not be ignored. Evenings in the village became moments of reflection. After helping Isabella settle, Santiago would often ride Luna to the edge of the plains, watching the sun dip behind distant hills. The colors of the sky mirrored the emotions he felt, warm, fleeting, and beautiful. He thought about Isabella's vulnerability, her courage, and the way she had quietly entered his life, shaking the foundations of a heart that had been careful to remain closed. For the first time, he began to question the rules he had lived by, rules that valued solitude and self-reliance over connection and affection. Their conversations also touched on dreams and fears. Isabella confided that she often felt constrained by expectations in her own life, longing to explore, to see the world, and to be free. Santiago admitted that he had never truly allowed himself to imagine a life beyond the plains, believing that attachment brought more pain than joy. Yet, in these shared moments, they discovered that their fears could be eased by trust and understanding. Santiago realized that he had been protecting himself from heartache, but in doing so, he had missed the possibility of something extraordinary: love, care, and companionship. One afternoon, while sitting beneath a large mesquite tree, Isabella reached out and touched Santiago's hand lightly. It was a small, fleeting gesture, but it sent a jolt through him. He glanced at her, their eyes meeting, and for a moment neither spoke. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying the scent of earth and flowers from the distant fields. Santiago felt a new awareness growing inside him, a mixture of tenderness, admiration, and longing he could no longer ignore. He realized that Isabella's presence had awakened emotions he had carefully hidden for years, emotions that now demanded recognition. Yet, despite the closeness, there was an unspoken tension between them. Santiago feared showing too much, fearing that attachment might bring vulnerability. Isabella, though grateful for his help, carried her own awareness that her stay in the village was temporary. Each day they shared was a delicate balance between closeness and the knowledge that their time together was limited. Santiago felt a quiet ache, a growing realization that he might not be able to hold onto this connection forever. And yet he continued to stay close, drawn by the undeniable bond that had formed between them. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Santiago and Isabella walked to the river's edge. The water reflected the colors of the sunset, and the gentle current created a soothing sound that filled the air. They sat side by side on the riverbank, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. Santiago noticed Isabella watching the horizon, her eyes thoughtful, and he felt a desire to protect her, not just physically, but from the uncertainties of life that she might face when she returned to her world. He wanted to shield her from pain, to be her strength as she had become his inspiration. During these quiet moments, they began to share more personal stories. Santiago spoke of his childhood struggles, the hardships of growing up in a remote area, and the loneliness that had defined much of his life. Isabella, in return, spoke of dreams she had postponed, the pressure of family expectations, and the adventures she longed to pursue. Their voices, soft and honest, carried across the water, intertwining like the currents of the river. Santiago realized that these conversations were more than just sharing stories. They were building trust, understanding, and a bond that neither could easily define. The days turned into a week, and Isabella's recovery progressed. She could walk with minimal support, and Santiago felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He was proud of her resilience, but also anxious about what the future might hold. The thought of her leaving the village and returning to her own life filled him with a quiet, unfamiliar sadness. He had come to rely on her presence, and the thought of absence made his heart tighten. Yet he knew he could not force her to stay. The plains were his home, but her world was elsewhere. One afternoon, as they tended to the small garden near the village, Isabella paused and looked at Santiago with a gentle smile. "You've done so much for me," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." Santiago shrugged, his eyes meeting hers. "No thanks are needed," he replied. "It's only right to help someone in need." But in his heart, he felt something deeper than duty, an affection, a protective instinct, and a connection that went beyond words. He realized that he had been changed by her presence, that life in the plains was no longer the same without the promise of seeing her each day. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, Santiago helped Isabella settle into her temporary room. He brought her a warm drink and ensured she was comfortable. When he stepped outside, the cool evening breeze brushing against his face, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the week they had shared, the laughter, the struggles, the quiet conversations, and the simple acts of care. He realized that this bond, unexpected and powerful, had awakened feelings he could no longer deny. Santiago returned to his cabin that night with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. He knew that Isabella's recovery would soon allow her to leave, and the thought of losing her presence filled him with a quiet dread. Yet he also understood that these feelings were a testament to the depth of the connection they had formed, a connection built on trust, care, and shared vulnerability. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, letting the sounds of the plains lull him into thought. The stars above twinkled like distant reminders of the vastness of the world, and Santiago felt a growing awareness that his life, once defined by solitude, had been touched by something extraordinary. He knew that the days ahead would be challenging, not in work, but in understanding the emotions he had long denied. Isabella had arrived as a stranger, injured and vulnerable, yet she had awakened something within him that he could not ignore. The act of helping her, of sharing moments of trust and care, had created a bond that Santiago knew would linger, shaping the rest of his days in ways he could not yet imagine. And though the path forward was uncertain, he felt a quiet determination to honor this connection, even if it meant facing the vulnerabilities he had spent a lifetime avoiding. As Isabella's ankle grew stronger and her steps steadier, the bond between her and Santiago deepened in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet routine they had shared began to feel like a small, private world of its own, a world where the vast plains, the blazing sun, and the gentle river became a backdrop for a connection that went far beyond mere friendship. Santiago, who had always been careful to guard his heart, found himself thinking of Isabella long before he saw her each morning. Her laughter lingered in his mind like a melody, and the warmth of her presence made even the harsh sunlight of the plains feel softer, more bearable. Their mornings often began with small tasks. Santiago would fetch fresh water from the river, gather fruits and vegetables, and bring them to Isabella's temporary room. He would help her stretch her ankle gently, ensuring she was ready for the day. Isabella, in turn, would assist him with chores, fetching tools or helping to feed the cattle. These moments, filled with simple, practical work, became opportunities for laughter and conversation. They spoke of the plains, of the animals, of the skies that seemed endless. Santiago discovered that Isabella had a sharp mind and a keen sense of humor, one that could make even the quietest moments feel alive and joyful. One afternoon, while guiding Isabella along a narrow trail, Santiago noticed how naturally she moved now, her confidence returning step by step. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, and the air was filled with the scent of dry grass and the distant river. Santiago could not help but glance at her often, watching the way her hair caught the sunlight, the gentle determination in her eyes, and the soft expression of gratitude whenever he offered support. It was a small, almost imperceptible intimacy, yet it carried a weight heavier than words could describe. They began to share more personal stories, revealing parts of themselves that had remained hidden from the world. Isabella spoke of her childhood, her family, and the dreams she had quietly nurtured for years. She told Santiago of the adventures she longed to have, the cities she wished to explore, and the people she hoped to meet. Santiago listened, fascinated not just by her stories, but by the spirit behind them, a spirit that refused to be constrained by fear or expectation. In turn, he shared memories of the plains, the solitude he had endured, and the lessons he had learned about resilience, patience, and survival. Their conversations were honest, raw, and unguarded, forming a foundation of trust that strengthened their growing connection. One evening, as the sky shifted from pink to deep purple, Santiago suggested they sit by the river and watch the sunset together. The gentle flow of water, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant call of birds created a serene atmosphere. Isabella leaned against Santiago, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, and he felt a warmth spread through him that was unfamiliar yet welcome. For a moment, the vastness of the plains seemed less lonely, the horizon less daunting, and the weight of solitude less pressing. In the quiet, Santiago realized that this simple closeness, the act of sharing silence, of being present for each other, had become one of the most meaningful experiences of his life. As days passed, their bond grew stronger through shared experiences and small acts of care. Santiago would help Isabella climb small hills to enjoy the view of the plains, offering a steady hand and encouraging words. Isabella, despite her initial hesitations, began to rely on him more, not out of weakness, but out of trust and the understanding that Santiago's presence was a source of safety and comfort. They laughed together at minor missteps, shared stories about the animals and land, and sometimes just sat in companionable silence, watching the sun paint the world in golden hues. Each moment deepened their connection, and Santiago began to feel a quiet but undeniable pull toward her. Yet, amidst the closeness, Santiago also felt a shadow of uncertainty. He had lived his life alone, protecting his heart from vulnerability, and now he was confronting emotions he had long avoided. Isabella's presence was changing him in ways that were both beautiful and frightening. He realized that he cared for her deeply, that her safety, happiness, and even the smallest gestures of her daily life mattered more to him than he had ever imagined. But he also recognized that life in the plains was unpredictable, and attachments could bring pain. This awareness made him cautious, yet it did not diminish the feelings growing within him. One day, while repairing a fence near the river, Santiago noticed Isabella standing a short distance away, watching him with a thoughtful expression. He paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow, and walked toward her. "You've come a long way," he said softly. Isabella smiled, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. Santiago felt a sudden surge of emotion, a mix of pride, tenderness, and something more, something that made his chest tighten and his heart beat faster. In that simple exchange, he realized that their connection had grown beyond friendship, that a bond of trust, care, and quiet affection now tied them together in ways he could not ignore. Their conversations also began to touch on deeper topics, hopes, fears, and the meaning of life beyond the plains. Isabella confessed that while she had always been independent, she sometimes felt lost, unsure of the path she should take. Santiago shared his own doubts, the loneliness he had endured, and the walls he had built around his heart. In these moments, they found understanding and empathy in each other. Santiago began to see that emotions, though risky, could also bring strength, courage, and a sense of purpose. Isabella, too, felt a growing reliance on Santiago's presence, a quiet reassurance that someone understood her, accepted her, and cared for her deeply. One late afternoon, as they rested beneath a large oak tree, Santiago noticed a small tear on Isabella's cheek. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle. Isabella shook her head, trying to brush it off. "It's nothing," she whispered, but Santiago could see the vulnerability in her eyes. He reached out, brushing the tear away, and held her hand lightly. The gesture, simple yet intimate, created a spark of emotion neither could deny. Santiago felt a surge of protectiveness, realizing that he wanted to shield her from pain, to be there for her in every way possible. Isabella, in turn, felt comforted by his presence, recognizing that their bond had grown into something profound and rare. As the week drew to a close, Santiago became increasingly aware that his feelings for Isabella were changing him. The loneliness he had once embraced now felt like a dull ache in her absence, and her laughter, her stories, and her presence became essential to his sense of peace. He found himself imagining a future where she remained by his side, a life that seemed both improbable and irresistible. Yet he also understood that Isabella's journey was her own, and the reality of her temporary stay in the village loomed over them like an unspoken truth. Despite this, they continued to spend time together, cherishing each moment as if it were a rare treasure. They explored the plains, tending to the cattle, walking along the river, and enjoying the small joys of life in the village. Santiago discovered that he could be himself around Isabella, vulnerable, open, and unguarded, without fear of judgment or ridicule. Isabella, in turn, felt safe expressing her thoughts, emotions, and dreams, knowing that Santiago would listen and understand. Their bond, forged through care, trust, and shared experiences, had grown into a connection that neither of them wanted to break. Then, one evening, as the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, Isabella leaned closer to Santiago, her eyes meeting his. The moment was silent, yet it carried a weight that words could not convey. Santiago felt his heart race, a mix of longing, tenderness, and fear. He realized that the simple acts of care, the shared conversations, and the laughter had built something more profound, a bond of trust, affection, and perhaps even love. But with this realization came a quiet fear, for he knew that life's realities could not be ignored, and that their time together might be limited. In the days that followed, Santiago found himself reflecting on the depth of his emotions. He realized that he had allowed someone into his heart for the first time, someone whose presence brought both joy and vulnerability. He understood that love, care, and connection were not weaknesses, but powerful forces that could shape life in unexpected ways. Isabella's presence had awakened a part of him he had long ignored, and Santiago knew that their journey together, though uncertain, was a turning point in both their lives. By the end of the week, Santiago and Isabella had created a bond that was unbreakable in its quiet strength. They had shared stories, laughter, struggles, and triumphs, and in doing so had found in each other a sense of belonging neither had expected. Santiago, once a solitary cowboy, realized that life's beauty lay not only in the vastness of the plains, but in the connection between hearts. And as they watched the sun set over the horizon, both knew that their bond had grown into something that would shape the days ahead, a connection that neither time nor distance could easily erase. As the days passed, Santiago and Isabella grew closer in ways that neither had anticipated. They had shared laughter, simple joys, and quiet moments beneath the sun and stars, and a sense of connection had developed that went far beyond friendship. Santiago had begun to realize that he cared for Isabella in a way that was unfamiliar, intense, and consuming. Her presence had become essential to his days, her voice a comfort, and her laughter a sound that could lighten even the heaviest burdens. He had never imagined that he could feel this way about another person, and the intensity of his emotions both thrilled and terrified him. But as the bond between them strengthened, Isabella began to reveal the reality of her situation. One evening, as the sky was painted with shades of pink and purple, she took Santiago aside, her face thoughtful and serious. "Santiago," she began softly, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her, sensing the weight in her words. She explained that her family awaited her in the distant city, and she could not remain in the village indefinitely. She had come to the plains for exploration and adventure, but her obligations called her back. Her tone was calm, yet Santiago could see the hesitation and sadness in her eyes. The news struck Santiago like a sudden gust of wind. His heart tightened, and a cold unease settled in his chest. He had known in the back of his mind that Isabella's stay was temporary, but hearing her say it aloud made it real. The thought of losing her presence filled him with a quiet dread. He struggled to keep his emotions in check, not wanting to overwhelm her or make her feel guilty for her responsibilities. Yet, beneath his calm exterior, a storm of feelings raged: fear, sadness, longing, and the sharp pain of impending loss. Santiago spent the following days in quiet reflection, trying to reconcile his feelings with the reality of Isabella's departure. He continued to care for her, to help her walk and complete her daily tasks, but a new tension lingered in the air. Their interactions were filled with unspoken words, glances that lingered too long, and moments of hesitation that neither knew how to address. Santiago found himself noticing every detail: the way Isabella's hair fell across her face, the subtle shifts in her expressions, and the quiet strength in her movements. Every gesture reminded him of what he might soon lose. Despite the growing tension, they continued to share meaningful moments. They walked along the river, exploring the hidden trails and shaded groves that Santiago knew so well. Isabella laughed when she stumbled over uneven ground, and Santiago instinctively caught her, holding her close. These moments, though fleeting, carried a weight of intimacy and emotion that neither could ignore. Santiago felt a deep longing to hold onto these days, to preserve the connection they had built, even as he knew that time was slipping through their fingers. One afternoon, as they rested beneath a large oak tree, Isabella confided more of her thoughts and fears. She admitted that leaving the village and returning to her family felt both necessary and painful. She had grown attached to Santiago, to the plains, and to the quiet beauty of life they had shared. Yet, she knew that her responsibilities could not be ignored. Santiago listened in silence, his heart heavy, understanding the truth in her words. He wanted to argue, to convince her to stay, but he also knew that love was not about possession or control. It was about understanding, patience, and respect for the other person's life and choices. As the day wore on, Santiago and Isabella worked side by side, repairing fences and tending to the cattle. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil, but every glance and every shared smile reminded them of the bond they had developed. Santiago felt an ache in his chest, a longing that could not be satisfied by work or routine. He realized that he had allowed himself to fall deeply in love with Isabella, and the thought of losing her brought a vulnerability he had never experienced before. That evening, they sat together on a hill overlooking the plains, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The colors of the sky mirrored the emotions swelling within Santiago: warmth, beauty, longing, and a quiet melancholy. Isabella leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, and he felt a surge of emotion that made it difficult to speak. Words seemed inadequate to express the depth of feeling that had grown between them. Instead, they remained in silence, letting the connection between them convey what could not be said aloud. The approaching departure weighed heavily on both of them. Santiago found himself torn between the desire to hold Isabella close and the understanding that her path lay elsewhere. He struggled with feelings of helplessness, knowing that he could not control her choices, yet longing to protect her from pain and uncertainty. Isabella, too, grappled with her emotions, caught between the comfort and affection she felt with Santiago and the responsibilities that awaited her in the city. Their hearts were bound together, yet reality loomed as an unyielding force that neither could ignore. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, Santiago and Isabella embarked on a walk along the river, the water sparkling in the early light. They spoke softly, their conversation tinged with a sense of urgency and reflection. Isabella admitted that she feared leaving the plains, leaving Santiago, and returning to a life that felt distant and constraining. Santiago, in turn, shared his own fears: the fear of losing the connection they had forged, the fear of loneliness returning, and the uncertainty of whether he could endure the absence of her presence. In their honesty, they found a bittersweet understanding that their bond was real, powerful, and vulnerable. As the days grew closer to Isabella's departure, the tension between them intensified. Every shared glance, every touch, every moment of laughter carried a deeper meaning, a silent acknowledgement that their time together was limited. Santiago began to notice the subtle ways Isabella's eyes searched for reassurance, the way her hand lingered near his, and the quiet hesitation in her movements. Each observation stirred a mix of hope and fear within him, hope for the depth of their connection, and fear for the impending separation. One afternoon, as they rested beneath a shaded grove, Isabella spoke quietly. "Santiago, I wish I could stay longer," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I have to go. My family, my life, it's waiting for me." Santiago's chest tightened, and he swallowed hard, struggling to maintain composure. He nodded, understanding the truth in her words, even as his heart ached. He wanted to beg her to stay, to promise that they could find a way to be together, but he knew that such words could not change reality. Instead, he held her hand gently, conveying his feelings through touch, and allowed silence to speak what words could not. The night before her departure, they sat by the river one last time, the water reflecting the stars above. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments, cherishing the time that remained. Santiago felt the weight of impending loss pressing heavily on his heart, and Isabella's presence seemed both comforting and painfully fleeting. They knew that tomorrow would bring change, and the thought of separation was unbearable. Yet, in that moment, they allowed themselves to simply be together, embracing the connection they had nurtured with care, trust, and honesty. When the morning came, Isabella prepared to leave. Santiago stood by her side, trying to remain composed as he helped her onto her horse. The village was quiet, the plains stretching endlessly around them, and the wind carried a sense of farewell. Isabella turned to Santiago, her eyes filled with gratitude, affection, and unspoken sorrow. Santiago held her hand, his grip firm yet gentle, and whispered words of encouragement and care. Neither spoke of love directly, but their hearts understood the depth of feeling that had grown between them. As Isabella rode away, Santiago watched her disappear into the distance, the plains feeling emptier than ever before. The connection they had shared remained in his heart, a bittersweet reminder of love, trust, and the vulnerability that comes with caring deeply for another. He realized that in helping Isabella, in being present for her, he had given a part of himself that could not be reclaimed. The act of loving and caring had transformed him, leaving a lasting imprint on his heart. The plains returned to their quiet rhythm, but Santiago's perspective had changed forever. The wind still whispered through the grass, the river still flowed steadily, and the mountains stood as silent witnesses to life's endurance. Yet Santiago now carried with him the memory of Isabella, the bond they had formed, and the profound realization that love and connection, though sometimes fleeting, were among the most powerful experiences a person could have. He understood that life could bring joy and pain intertwined, and that opening one's heart, even when it risked loss, was a necessary and transformative act. After Isabella left, the plains felt emptier than ever. The mornings, once filled with the quiet warmth of her presence, now echoed with silence. Santiago rode Luna through the familiar trails, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and completing the routines that had always defined his life. But despite the work and the sunlit days, a quiet ache lingered in his heart, a constant reminder of the bond he had shared with Isabella and the absence that now defined his life. The plains, vast and beautiful as they were, seemed lonelier, the wind colder, and the river quieter without her beside him. Santiago tried to focus on his daily tasks, knowing that the work required his attention. He rode from sunrise to sunset, checking on the cattle, repairing fences, and making sure the land remained in order. Yet with every task, his mind wandered back to the memories of Isabella, the way she had smiled at him, the laughter that had filled the quiet moments, and the gentle way she had trusted him with her vulnerability. He realized that he had fallen deeply in love with her, and the thought of never seeing her again made his chest ache with a pain he had never known. Nights were the hardest. Santiago would sit on the porch of his small cabin, staring at the stars above. The same sky that had once felt vast and endless now seemed to remind him of what he had lost. He thought about the moments they had shared, sitting by the river at sunset, walking together through shaded trails, the laughter over small mistakes, and the quiet conversations that had revealed their hopes and fears. Each memory was vivid, like a flame burning gently in his chest, both comforting and painful at the same time. Santiago often reflected on how much Isabella had changed him. Before meeting her, he had lived a life of solitude, believing that emotional connection was dangerous and unnecessary. He had thought that self-reliance and independence were the only paths to strength. But Isabella had shown him something different. Through her trust, vulnerability, and quiet courage, she had awakened a part of him he had long denied, the capacity to care deeply, to open his heart, and to feel love in its purest form. He realized that the act of loving and caring for someone else, even for a brief time, had transformed him completely. In the weeks after Isabella's departure, Santiago found himself noticing the small details of life in new ways. The river seemed brighter, the plains more alive, and even the wind carried a sense of memory and reflection. He began to see the world through the lens of connection rather than solitude. Each day, as he rode across the plains, he remembered Isabella's voice, the way she had laughed, and the courage she had shown in facing her own challenges. These memories became both a comfort and a bittersweet reminder of the depth of their bond. Despite the lingering sadness, Santiago also recognized the lessons he had learned. He understood that love, even when it brings pain, is a force that enriches life. Isabella had shown him that vulnerability is not weakness, that caring for another person can reveal inner strength, and that connections, though sometimes fleeting, leave lasting imprints on the heart. Santiago carried these lessons with him, applying them not just to thoughts of Isabella, but to the way he interacted with the land, the animals, and the few villagers he trusted. Life had gained a new dimension, one filled with meaning and emotional depth. Santiago also began to write letters, though he never sent them, pouring out his thoughts and feelings about Isabella. In these letters, he recounted the days they had shared, the laughter, the struggles, and the quiet moments that had defined their bond. Writing allowed him to process his emotions, to give voice to the love and longing he felt, and to acknowledge the transformation she had brought to his life. Even if Isabella never read these letters, Santiago felt a sense of relief and clarity, knowing that he had allowed himself to experience the full depth of his feelings without regret. Over time, Santiago started to notice subtle changes in himself. He was more patient with the animals, more attentive to the land, and more aware of the small joys that life offered. He laughed more freely, thought more deeply about his choices, and even began to dream in ways he had never allowed himself before. Isabella's influence had left a permanent mark, shaping the way he approached life, work, and relationships. Though her absence was painful, it had also opened a door to emotional growth that Santiago would carry forever. One day, Santiago visited the hill where he and Isabella had often watched the sunset. The colors of the sky mirrored the emotions he felt, warm, fleeting, beautiful, and tinged with sadness. He sat on the grass, feeling the wind on his face, and allowed himself to remember the moments they had shared without trying to push away the pain. He realized that love does not always need to last to be meaningful. Sometimes, its value lies in the way it shapes a person's heart and perspective. In this quiet understanding, Santiago found a sense of peace he had never expected. Santiago also reflected on the courage Isabella had shown. She had been brave enough to trust him, to allow herself to be vulnerable, and to embrace the unknown with hope and determination. In turn, Santiago realized that he too had been brave enough to open his heart, to care deeply, and to experience love fully, even knowing that it might end. This shared courage, though separated by distance, created a connection that neither time nor distance could erase. He carried it with him, a quiet treasure that shaped the way he viewed life, love, and human connection. The plains continued their rhythm. The sun rose and set, the wind whispered through the grass, and the river flowed steadily. Santiago returned to his daily work with a new sense of purpose. Each day was filled with memories of Isabella, yet he no longer felt consumed by sadness. Instead, he felt a sense of gratitude for having experienced something so profound, for having allowed himself to love, and for having learned the depth of connection that life could offer. The lessons of compassion, trust, and vulnerability became guiding principles in the way he lived his life. Months passed, and the seasons changed. The harsh sun of summer gave way to cooler winds, and the plains, once empty and silent, seemed to hold traces of the moments he had shared with Isabella. Santiago continued to ride, work, and care for his land, but now with a heart that had been transformed. He welcomed the memories, cherishing the connection he had experienced, and allowing it to inform the way he engaged with the world. The love he had felt for Isabella became a source of strength, reminding him that even in solitude, the heart could grow richer and more resilient. Santiago also began to share his experiences with others in small ways, telling stories to children about courage and kindness, helping villagers with advice or work, and offering a quiet presence to those who needed support. In doing so, he realized that the lessons he had learned from Isabella were not only personal but universal. The experience had taught him that love, care, and empathy could change lives, create bonds, and leave lasting imprints, even if the people involved were no longer present. Years later, Santiago would still visit the river, the hills, and the places where he and Isabella had spent time together. Each visit brought memories and emotions, a reminder of a chapter in his life that had been brief but transformative. He would smile at the recollection of their laughter, the quiet moments, and the shared struggles. Though Isabella's presence had been temporary, her impact on Santiago's life had been permanent. She had awakened his heart, taught him the value of connection, and shown him that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than weakness. In the end, Santiago continued to live in the plains he loved, tending his cattle and riding the trails he had always known. Yet within him, a change had occurred. A heart that had once been closed and solitary was now open, capable of deep care and lasting affection. The memory of Isabella remained a gentle, constant presence in his heart, a reminder that love, even when fleeting, can leave a permanent mark. He had lost the immediate presence of her, but he had gained a richness of experience, emotional depth, and understanding that would guide him for the rest of his life. And so, Santiago lived on, carrying the memory of the woman who had entered his life like a sudden, bright light. He remembered the warmth of her hand in his, the laughter they shared, and the quiet evenings by the river. Though he had lost her physically, he had gained something far greater, a heart awakened, a life transformed, and the enduring understanding that true connection, love, and care are among the most powerful and lasting gifts life can offer. The plains remained vast and beautiful, but Santiago now walked them with a heart that had been touched, changed, and forever enriched by love.